weather enthusiasts. I'm your Met, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have Invest 90L that is still continuing to be hovering out here in the subtropical Atlantic. When we were streaming last night, we were looking at potentially organizing. And I know I did say yesterday that by the time I record the video for today, I wouldn't, if something doesn't happen by then, don't expect much to happen with 90L. It's looking more and more likely that that is the case. However, there is still a shot for tropical development according to the NHC. So let's go ahead and dive right into it right now. And this is what we got right here. So if you look at it from the surface based on what we reported yesterday and from the stream, and you look at the 60% probability of development, you're probably thinking, okay, they've increased the probability of development again. However, last night and this morning, the odds were actually even higher. And if I can go ahead and take a quick look at the archives to show you the tropical weather outlooks, taking a look at it, we actually had a 70-70 probability of development last night and earlier this morning. So those probabilities have come down over since the last advisory. However, we are going to go ahead and read this to kind of give you a general idea of what's going on. Recent satellite data indicate that the low-pressure system located more than 600 miles east-northeast of Bermuda is producing gale-force winds. So we're looking at least tropical storm-force winds with this system. However, shower and thunderstorm activity remains disorganized. Environmental conditions are still marginally favorable for further development, and an increase in thunderstorm activity could result in the formation of a short-lived tropical depression or storm by today or tonight. So the NHC isn't exactly discounting the probability of development. This system is trying to develop. However, the conditions are going to get increasingly unfavorable this point forward, and my personal take on it is this system's likely not going to develop unless something unexpected happens in the next couple of hours. By Tuesday, the system is expected to encounter unfavorable environmental conditions, ending its opportunity for development. The system is forecast to move east-northeast around 10 to 15 miles per hour, remaining over the open central Atlantic. For additional information, including gale warnings, high sea forecast. So 60% chance of formation in the next 48 hours, 60% chance in the next 7 days. So that's the kind of situation that we have going on with that. Hold on one second. So let's go ahead now and move on to satellite imagery. And we're going to go ahead and zoom into 90L and then move out to the Atlantic. So here's what we have going on right here. As you can see, there's not really much convection firing off on the system anymore. You're looking at it right now. It's not as healthy as it was looking last night. We can actually go ahead and go back a few frames. We're actually going to go ahead and go back to about 90 frames out just to show you this. But this is what we were looking at around 10 o'clock last night. You had some convection firing off actually pretty consistently. And if it was a tropical cyclone, it likely was last night. However, we're going to have to see what happens with the analysis and whether the NHC will do a postseason analysis to conduct that or not. But then you had more convection starting to fire off in the morning around the center, and then that's also dying off. So that's kind of something that we're looking at right here. Now, there is still a possibility this could develop, and that is if we see more convection starting to fire off near the center of circulation by the time of the latest advisory. But looking at it right now, it doesn't look that healthy. It doesn't look that particularly optimal. But you can't deny that there is a low-level circulation and even a mid-level circulation with this system right here. You can see it pretty evidently how it's rotating pretty quickly right there. So that's something you're going to want to pay attention to going forward with this. But by and large, it's moving into more unfavorable conditions, and this will likely be the last time we talk about Invest 90L unless this does become Tropical Depression 1 or Tropical Storm Andrea. So we are going to have to pay attention to that. Moving on to satellite imagery and going to Atlantic wide. Basically, Brendan was making this point last night. Where is the storm? Where is the tropical cyclone? If I didn't point it out for you, you would probably have a hard time figuring it out. It's this system right here in the subtropics right here. It is a little isolated, yes, but right now it is kind of in a little bit of noise right here. There was a lot of convection here last night, and Brendan was making that point. Tony was also talking a little bit about that as well. But now let's go ahead and move on to some conditions. Let's go ahead and look at water vapor. Where the system is right now, there is some dry air starting to penetrate the system right now. That's why we're not really giving it much more of a shot of development past 7 o'clock tonight Central Time, 8 o'clock Eastern Time. That's kind of the time frame I'm going to give for it to develop. If it does develop, it's going to have to happen before that time frame. I do think that we did see a little bit better conditions than expected from what we were seeing after the stream last night, and I do think it extended the time frame just a little bit, but its absolute time frame for it to develop, it has to do it right now. If it doesn't, then it's not going to be a tropical system. So we'll have to see what happens over the next few hours. But as of right now, I don't really have much hope for it. Dry air starting to penetrate it. Wind shear isn't actually as big of a factor as you would expect with this, because normally with you'd have warm water and then you'd have strong wind shear. Cancels it out. You're not going to see tropical development. But the wind shear, where it's located, is still to the north of the system. And you're also looking at the situation where this is in the subtropics, so the mechanics of the wind shear are a little bit different. Also, the sea surface temperatures, which we'll get to in a second, the mechanics of that are a little bit different as well, because there is some other different forcing that we're going to have to take into account as well. So those are all factors, and those are all situations that we're going to want to pay attention to. Now, pivoting over to when we're going to see more development across the rest of the Atlantic, we're not 100% sure, but this was kind of the quote-unquote something unexpected I was talking about 90L was for development for late June. We're not going to see any more development until most likely July. Now, what are we going to see potentially in July? Let's go ahead and take a quick look. We're going to go ahead and start by looking at the conditions, looking at the trends, and then seeing how this will pan out going forward. So let's go ahead and start pretty simply. This is the sea surface temperatures, updating it for today, ladies and gentlemen. SSTs across much of the main development region, across the Caribbean, Gulf, and the Atlantic Basin, they're less of a factor and more of a constant. And I've said this before, but I want to explain a bit more thoroughly what I mean by that. A factor is, okay, are the water temperatures warm enough or not? The water temperatures are obviously warm enough for some tropical development, folks. So that's kind of the situation that we have with that. Now, looking at the map right now, you're looking at 28 degrees Celsius waters in much of the main development region, especially the southern half of the MDR, across the Caribbean, across the entire Gulf region, as well as now really surging in the Atlantic Basin as well. You're noticing that really start to turn up and really start to ramp up. Those water temperatures are mainly surface based. They haven't really stretched that far down into the further deeper down, just to explain it. But you're still there, and you're still looking at pretty warm waters, and those water temperatures are going to get deeper and deeper and deeper as the summer goes on, because July and August is really when the sea surface temperatures turn up in the main development region, and in parts of the main development region, especially in the Caribbean and in the Atlantic Basin. The Atlantic Basin is probably going to, in my opinion, see the highest spike of SSTs through the month of July. The Gulf saw arguably their highest spike of SSTs in May and June. Do I still think July is going to get close to what we saw then? Yeah, I think it's possible at this current point, but I don't think we're going to see the massive surge that we saw in May and June compared to what we saw in July. Water temperature is still going to warm up. We're still going to be cracking 30 degrees Celsius on average by the time this whole month gets passed over there, and the water temperatures are absolutely going to be warm enough for that. But by and large, it doesn't look like it's going to be warming up as fast as it was in May and June. Like, if we go ahead and show you May and June stuff right here, looking at this right now, let me go ahead and move my stuff over very quickly, and let me do that. If we look at May and June, starting May 1st, you saw a pretty big surge of SSTs right here, starting around 26.2 to 28.7. So that's a 2.5 degrees Celsius increase in the span of 31 days, which that's about 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you living in the United States. Now, a 4.5 degree change for those of you living at home may not seem like so much, but let's say, for example, you take your room temperature since it's summer. It starts off at 70 degrees at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then by noon it's at 74.5 to 75 degrees. Now take that warmth and apply that to an entire synoptic region, which is the Gulf pretty much. Warming and apply it to an entire synoptic region. Like, this is not a small area for so much warming to happen. It's a pretty big area for that to happen. Considering that these water temperatures are also getting deeper and deeper and deeper as well, that's also another factor that we have to look at. Ocean heat content. Let's go ahead and get into this right here. You've seen this right here. You've seen this map, ladies and gentlemen. OHC has absolutely surged across much of the Gulf. Although it has, the biggest surge I've noticed has been in this area in the loop current right here. We're cracking almost 175 OHC. And for those of you who do not know how high 175 OHC is, that's conducive for pretty explosive strengthening right there. Similar to, like, I'm just throwing hypotheticals out here. I'm not saying it's going to happen this year, but similar to what we saw with Hurricane Milton last year when it just absolutely exploded. It was over a very large area of OHC, some very explosive OHC, to say the very least. So that's also another factor to consider as well. In terms of the rest of the Atlantic, you're really noticing the OHC starting to turn up in parts of the Atlantic basin over here. Although the water temperatures, which at the surface are around 28, 27 degrees Celsius, they haven't really gone that deep down yet, and that's why you're not seeing higher OHC returns. What you would normally want to see with that is kind of like this. And remember from last year, I can actually go ahead and pull this up from last year, because those OHC values were absolutely ridiculous, and that's what a lot of people continue to talk about. And we'll go ahead and go to June 23rd of last year just to show you. This. So this is what we had at this point last year. You had a lot of OHC. It was a lot more. It was kind of a lot more spread out, but at the same time, it was the highest totals were concentrated in the Caribbean, the Loop Current, and the Eastern Main Development Region. This year, it's more so concentrated in the Northwestern Caribbean and in the Gulf, particularly around the Loop Current. You're also noticing a few isolated areas on the southern end of the MDR, close to South America. But compared to last year, this OHC is much further to the north than what we were seeing previous, and that's something you're going to want to pay attention to as those water temperatures continue to play a pretty important factor. So that's what we're looking at right there. I mean, I say factor, I mean in terms of I say factor in terms of like the OHC. That's a pretty big factor right there. That's something you can factor in terms of, how much OHC we're looking at, because water temperatures on their own are a constant. OHC is more of a factor, mainly because how high can we go? That's pretty much the main game of what's going to be happening over the next couple of months. Now we're going to go ahead and pivot a little bit and talk about the wind shear and talk about the moisture, because I want to emphasize a few important points as we start getting into late June, as we get into early July next week, to pay attention to. Let's go ahead and start with the wind shear. Wind shear over the next few days really starts to decrease across much of the Eastern Main Development Region. In the next 36 hours, you're starting to notice that process begin. Then you're starting to notice how that's kind of spreading out a bit more. You're noticing lower wind shear returns and lower wind shear values across a lot of these regions in the MDR. And you're also noticing how this bulk wind shear pattern right here does start to lift a little bit. It starts to retract and it starts to lift a little bit. It starts to bulge a little bit. That's your more wavy pattern. That as we get into July, it's going to get a lot more chaotic, and it's going to get a lot more up and down, up and down, up and down. That's a typical pattern for that. And as we go into July, in my opinion, wind shear is going to become less of a factor inhibiting development. What's going to really replace that, though, to some extent, is the Sahara air layer. And now the question would be, okay, what's the SAL going to be like? How powerful is the SAL going to be? And is it going to impact the main development region? And we'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. But what I do want to emphasize is essentially you're noticing this wind shear really starting to decrease, really starting to fluctuate across much of the main development region, across especially the western Atlantic as well. You're starting to really start to see just how this wind shear just goes up, it goes down, it goes all over the place, and all of that stuff. So that's something I do want to emphasize to you as well. So as we go into the seventh right here, you're noticing a lot of this wind shear turns like just weakens in the Caribbean and in the Gulf region as well. So you're going to want to keep a very close eye on that as well. So that's kind of the wind shear, and based on the patterns, wind shear is going to be less of a like I said before, it's going to be less of a factor that inhibits development, and it's going to mainly turn towards what's going to be happening with the relative humidity in terms of the Sahara air layer and the dry air. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at that, ladies and gentlemen. So, if we go ahead and take a look at this, you are seeing a lot of Sahara dust moving through parts of the Caribbean, parts of the Atlantic as well. You're noticing a bit of an increase right here as well. However, I am noticing more moisture starting to increase as well across parts of the main development region as well. So those are some factors to watch as well. And ultimately, taking a look at this right now, you're seeing kind of more of a mixed pattern compared to like a completely dry shutdown pattern, where there are some pockets of moist air and some pockets of dry air in the main development region, but those get more mixed going forward. And now you see a pretty big moisture infusion going on across parts of the main development region that you're going to want to pay attention to going forward. So we're going to have to see what happens. And another thing we need to take into account as well is the positioning of the high pressure systems, as well as the positioning of a potential low that may develop, positioning of the Mediterranean winds. We're going to want to pay attention to that as well. But looking at the Sahara dust, it does, at least at the surface, look like it's going to be like kind of what we typically see with Sahara air really starting to kind of inhibit more tropical development. But if we take a look at the precipitable water anomalies, they do tell a different story. We are looking at a more moist environment than average across the main development region, the Caribbean, and even in parts of the Gulf as well. It's a lot more mixed, and you're seeing a lot bigger. You're seeing those moisture surges really amplify in the amount of precipitable water that they're going to be bringing to the table. So why am I bringing this up? Ultimately, the situation that we have right here is pretty much that I would argue that we're looking at a more moist environment than average. Sahara dust does, it looks like from the models, it does look like the Sahara dust it doesn't really change particularly that much, but you're seeing more moisture starting to get into the Atlantic Ocean. You're seeing more moisture getting into the tropics. And that's kind of the situation we're looking at. We're looking at some more moisture surges due to tropical waves, the monsoon season picking up in the Sahel, and all of that stuff as well. One last thing I do want to take a quick look at is kind of the probability charts based on the European run right here. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. This is yesterday's right here. Well, obviously this really turned up over the last 24 hours right here for that week. But going to the 30th to the 7th, you're noticing too, I'm finding this kind of interesting. You're noticing potential for tropical development kind of off the coast of the Carolinas as well. That's been a pretty consistent track right there. So we'll have to see how that ultimately pans out going forward. Then going from the 7th to the 14th, you're noticing those chances do start to increase a bit more in the MDR, and noticing those probabilities still kind of hovering along the Carolina coast as well. And then the 24th to the 21st, you're noticing more of these probabilities in the main development region going forward. So that's kind of your situation that we're looking at least for the time being. So why am I bringing all this up? Why am I taking a look at all these factors? Well, in my opinion, number one, they're important to diagnose, okay, what are the factors for this going forward? And number two, when are we going to potentially see a development other than Invest 90L that is currently on a downtrend? Well, based on what I'm seeing, I can't give you an exact date of when we're going to see in July, but I do think starting, in my opinion, based on what I'm seeing, I would say I would start watching out around like July, after Independence Day, for those of you living in America, like the 4th of July. I would start watching out after that and seeing how this goes, because what I want to hone in on is what the conditions are going to look like, because starting in July, the conditions really start to fluctuate, and we do, in my opinion, see more probabilities and more chances of tropical development, and those are all things we're going to continue to keep you updated on here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. If you want to help out, hang out, or you want to ask us questions, be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.